There's a few exciting new Nintendo Switch stories we have to talk about today, starting with Nintendo directly confirming that we will be indeed seeing an Indie World Showcase tomorrow. Then we also have to cover an updated 2022 Nintendo Switch games roadmap, as Nintendo just wrapped up their quarterly financial briefing and there is a lot of new information to unpack. Then the big talking point for today's video is an interesting back and forth between Nintendo's president and a particular reporter around the subject of whether or not Nintendo is planning to release some kind of new Nintendo Switch in the upcoming future. What's up, nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. Now, as I mentioned, guys, we got a few different major stories to get through today, and we have to kick it off with a conversation around Nintendo finally confirming that heavily rumored Indie World Direct, as we did have Emily Rogers essentially allude to it in the same way that she did right before the December Indie World was announced. And if you have any questions about Emily Rogers at this point having some source and some kind of inside information, I think you can safely say that she definitely has connections and is somebody that is worth paying attention to when they do tweet out things like this, because there are definitely plenty of questionable leakers out there that are probably just trying to get attention. Emily Rogers is not one of them. She's very well respected in the gaming community and development community, and it's also exciting to me that she is the one that has actually been talking about the Metroid Prime 1 remake that is heavily rumored to be essentially done and ready to go, potentially being revealed as soon as something like this June upcoming direct that we hopefully can expect. I'm certain that we will. This Indie Direct even seems like it points to Nintendo doing business as usual and going on with their regular schedule. This E3 cancellation does not directly affect them in any way, shape, or form, so I think we are relatively safe to expect some super hype announcements to come from this summer. But in terms of the Indie Direct, you can see the following tweeted out from Nintendo directly. Tune in May 11th at 7 a.m. Pacific time for new Indie World NA showcase featuring roughly 20 minutes of information on upcoming indie games headed to Nintendo Switch. Now, I went over a couple of the hype games that I'm hoping to be there, being Hollow Knight Silksong, which I'm going in with low expectations to see that one, and then TMNT Shredder's Revenge. Give us a release date. Hopefully it's right around the corner. I'm ready for that stuff to be unveiled. Outside of those two, I don't have a whole lot of hype indie titles, but I'm always excited to see some surprise, unique, interesting gameplay experiences from these indie directs. And with the month of May being relatively light on new games from Nintendo, I am very excited to see what kind of surprise shadow drops we may see and what kind of just brand new projects that we didn't know about at this point, and get some hopefully big updates on games we are looking forward to. So I want to hear from you guys in the comments down below where your hype level is for this presentation. What are your big announcements that you're hoping we see revealed there, and are you planning on watching it tomorrow morning? So I do look forward to hearing from you guys on all things Indie World May 11th 2022 in the comments down below. Now, the next story we're talking about today has to do with a lot of the brand new sales data that was indeed revealed from Nintendo's most recent financial briefing that just happened overnight for us here in the US, but essentially very early in the morning over in Japan. And we have some brand new notable numbers to go over, but also an updated look at Nintendo's roadmap for their 2022 games lineup and even beyond that, as if you had any questions about Nintendo potentially delaying certain titles or certain titles falling out of the 2022 lineup, this is a nice indication that things are still on track. And so to quickly kick off this conversation, I do want to hop over to VGC, where they have a detailed article typed up with all of the different sales results and a look at the updated 2022 Nintendo Switch software roadmap. Switch hits 107.6 million as Nintendo claims its highest annual software sales ever. Kirby clears 2.1 million in 2 weeks. Pokemon Legends sold 12.64 million, and Metroid Dread managed 2.9 million. Nintendo Switch has made further ground on the company's best ever selling games hardware with 107.65 million units shipped as of March 31st, 2022, the firm said on Tuesday. Earlier this year, Switch was already confirmed to be the best-selling Nintendo home console of all time, beating the Wii's 101 million. However, that still has a way to go before it matches Nintendo DS's 154 million units sold and Game Boy and Game Boy Color at 118 million. Around 25% of the year's Switch sales were the new OLED unit, Nintendo said, while the standard console made up 58.7%. Switch launched in March 2017, Switch Lite released in September 2019, and the new Nintendo Switch OLED model launched in October 2021. The company said it expects to ship 21 million consoles before the end of its current fiscal year in March 2023, which represents a 9.8% decline from the previous year and a 37% decline from fiscal year 2020. However, it should be noted that Nintendo is known for conservative projections. As is traditional for financial reports, Nintendo also provided updated software sales numbers on Tuesday. A total of 39 titles sold over 1 million units during Nintendo's fiscal year 2022. As a result, software sales grew 1.8% year-on-year to 235 million units, making it the highest annual software sales figure ever posted for a Nintendo platform to date, according to the company. Now to then cover the updated 2022 Nintendo Switch software roadmap, we of course have Nintendo Switch Sports, which is already launched as of April 29th, Mario Strikers Battle League next up at June 10th, Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes at June 24th, Live Alive or Live Alive, not sure how that one's said, is scheduled for July 22nd, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 July 29th, Splatoon 3 at September 9th, both Pokemon Scarlet and Violet slated for late 2022, Bayonetta 3 still on track for 2022, which is great news, the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild spring 2023, Metroid Prime 4, which is to be announced, and Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp also to be announced. Now you may notice over on the Japan side of things, you do have Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope still slated for 2022. That is not on the United States or Europe section. However, that is most likely because Ubisoft will be publishing those titles in those regions and Nintendo will be handling the publishing in Japan, which is the reason for the discrepancy. But essentially, if you were worried about Bayonetta 3 or Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope, at this point it sounds like we are still relatively safe to predict those games, providing there are no surprise delays or anything. Now to break down all of the sales data, it's like, okay, great. Nintendo has such a strong install base when it comes to their current consoles that they are now breaking all-time software sale records when it comes to this platform, which is just an amazing thing to see. And when you talk about profit for the company year in and year out, we're going to get better titles, bigger titles, and better games at the end of the day, just because the continued software momentum that Nintendo sees. Other companies do not see this kind of buy-in rate on software, and just Pokemon alone selling in the multi-millions of units, in the tens of millions so fast after launch, and the fact that we still have Scarlet and Violet, which is an entire new generation of Pokemon games, and claiming to be the first one to take it truly open world around the corner in 2022, it is definitely an incredible time to watch Nintendo continue to expand their library, grow their revenue base, and then also get some reconfirmation that some hype titles like Bayonetta 3, Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hopes is still on track for 2022's release. It is interesting to see a to be determined with Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp. When will that game come out? There's been some speculation and talk online, specifically from Jeff Grubb, saying that he expects it to be a December title, which is like, wow, that is definitely a very long delay at that point. And Metroid Prime 4 is still confirmed as part of their roadmap. I am hoping that we get some kind of acknowledgement of what's going on with that game at the Summer Direct presentation, whenever that takes place. So I want to hear from you guys in the comments down below. If you had to predict any unannounced Nintendo titles that will be added into this 2022 roadmap, what do you think they are, and when do you think we see them revealed? And definitely share with me whether or not you're hyped that all of the existing titles we know about still seem to be on track for this year's release, according to Nintendo directly. So please share all your thoughts and feelings on all things Nintendo Switch 2022 games lineup, software, and hardware sales in the comments down below. Now, the last story we're talking about today also has to do with Nintendo's most recent financial briefing, but a specific back and forth that's been unfolding over the course of time online, specifically between Nintendo's president Shintaro Furukawa and Takahashi Mochizuki, who is a notable reporter for Bloomberg, that has been suggesting for quite some time that there is indeed new Nintendo Switch hardware that is unannounced besides the OLED model that was officially revealed from Nintendo. As if you're not familiar with the history of this story, prior to the official announcement of the Nintendo Switch OLED model, Takahashi Mochizuki was going on record stating that yes, Nintendo is working on new Switch hardware right now. It has a Surface style kickstand, it has a 7-inch OLED display, and mass manufacturing is going to be starting very soon. And at that time, directly from Takahashi Mochizuki himself, he believed that it was a 4K device, as he did have knowledge apparently of 4K ready Nintendo Switch dev kits out there. And it was also thought that the official announcement would come ahead of 2021's E3. That did not happen. A lot of people thought, well, these are clearly just false reports. Then, of course, you fast forward another month or two, Nintendo drops the official trailer for the OLED model. It does not support 4K, and a lot of people are surprised by that. Then Takahashi Mochizuki takes back to Bloomberg for another detailed article stating that he has 11 different developers that have a 4K ready dev kit for the Nintendo Switch, and that absolutely Nintendo is working on something that is 4K ready, and the OLED model is not that, and they still are working on brand new hardware that should see the light of day and see an announcement in the upcoming near future. Nintendo responded to that report the day after it went live by taking to Twitter, completely discrediting the fact that Bloomberg had put that out there. They did not call them out by name, but it was clearly a direct response after that started blowing up online, essentially refuting all claims that Nintendo was working on any kind of new Nintendo Switch hardware at this time. And so it's pretty clear that at this point there's some bad blood between Takahashi Mochizuki, the Bloomberg team that writes these articles, and Nintendo specifically, as if you are trying to keep something under wraps. You don't want somebody who found out inside information to leak any of that out there. It definitely can cause problems from a business perspective, and the reason this is back in the news today is following the wrap up of the financial briefing and the Q&A section. Takahashi Mochizuki took to Twitter to say the following: Nintendo President Furukawa declined to comment today when asked whether it plans to release a new Switch hardware this fiscal year. 2 years ago, when it didn't release a Switch hardware, he clearly said there won't be. So look, regardless of whether or not you subscribe to the idea that Nintendo is most likely working on some kind of Nintendo Switch hardware revision, before we talk about the true next-gen break for the console, I think this is a fascinating back and forth, as you essentially have Mochizuki going out there saying, hey, listen, because of how you answered this question, Furukawa, I'm going to remind everybody that I do have this inside information. I do know that devs have a 4K Switch, and the fact that you answered it with no comment as opposed to 2 years ago you said that you just weren't going to release a Switch points to the fact that you guys are most likely around the corner from announcing it at some point in the next fiscal year. So I personally just find that fascinating, and you will also know that there's been other leaks around Nintendo definitely working on new hardware. We know they're going to be working on new hardware at all times. Essentially, once a new console launches, they start the plans for what's next, and you even had that Nvidia hack that happened, which does clearly show an updated folder that does support DLSS technology and a new version of an Nvidia processor that is not the Tegra X1, and internally the way the files are named from Nvidia is literally the same file set as they use for the Tegra X1, but just a 2 after it in those folders, leading a lot of people to believe, yes, this is whatever the chipset is for the future more powerful Nintendo Switch revision. When we see that is all highly debated online. I'm not going to claim to know any kind of information whatsoever on when we will see Nintendo announce it. It makes logical sense to announce a more powerful hardware if they do have it close to ready to go around the time that Breath of the Wild 2 launches, because that will absolutely be a system seller. And if you tell your 100+ million install base that they have the option to play Breath of the Wild 2 in 4K, I actually think that that drives a lot of people to go out there and buy the new upgraded hardware. So maybe that's a possibility. It is not a confirmation though. I just find it very interesting that this conversation is not dying down, and Mochizuki is definitely reminding everybody that he believes that Nintendo is going to absolutely drop some new hardware besides the OLED model around the corner. Clearly, we're still in a chip shortage environment, but if Nintendo has been planning this for quite some time, they may still launch it and still have something where it's just a very hard console to find for quite some time, which is definitely frustrating as an end user, but it is something that we now deal with in this new reality we're in. So I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video on everything we talked about today. What games are you most hyped for and hope to see at tomorrow's Indie World presentation? How do you feel about the console and software sales from the fiscal results? And also, bonus, what do you think about Metroid Dread finishing out now as officially the best-selling Metroid game of all time, just barely passing Metroid Prime 1? And definitely share with me your personal thoughts and predictions on what Nintendo is planning with new hardware. Do you think this points to anything at all from Takahashi Mochizuki, or is he just kind of out of a limb on this point, believing things because he doesn't want to back down from being wrong? Like, I want to hear from you guys, regardless of your thoughts and opinions on everything we talked about today, in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Make sure you check out yesterday's video if you haven't already, where we discussed the reason that the Indie Direct was actually heavily rumored online ahead of its official announcement, and an interesting update that hit the Nintendo Switch Online app. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.